Hello and welcome. So today we're doing a short video on sort of how to troubleshoot a particular problem that you can frequently run into in Shadow Empire. It's not necessarily a problem with the game, but more of a problem that you as a player can run into. For demonstration purposes, we have Imperator314's save. At least that's their Reddit name. They were noticing a problem with their save, which is that they're having power problems. And at first glance, you might look at it and go like, okay, looks like they kind of have a brownout. Their buildings are higher up to full, and they're not quite getting enough power. So the problem that they're actually having is that they're having an SHQ delivery issue. So what the SHQ delivery issue is that you have more demand for an item to be shipped from the SHQ than the SHQ has to deliver. Once you diagnose that you think you might have one of the easiest ways to check and find out if that is the case is to come to the tooltip and figuring out whether or not you had enough to send. Right. So if we go ahead and look, in this case, at their energy, they have a maximum storage of 1,303. Their energy stockpile hasn't changed. And they have this power shortage. Plus, they're losing energy to max storage. That sort of combination is implying a couple different things happening at once. One, the reason their assets are not getting enough power is that they don't have it in the SHQ to ship. The SHQ, in its process of going through doing logistics, first sends to zones, sends to units, then receives from zones. So if it doesn't have something, so in this case it doesn't have enough energy to send, it can't send it. It then receives what it can from the zones. In that order. So it sends, then receives, sends, then receives. So if you hit a point like this, where you have energy coming in that is more than your maximum storage, you can ship what your storage is, because on any given turn, it will ship what it has, receive what it gets from the zones. But it doesn't retain between turns things in excess to storage. So in this case, they're voiding 744 power, which would actually be enough to cover their shortfall. So in theory, they have enough power. They don't have enough storage for it. So they can't handle interzone shipping effectively. There's two ways to solve this. And if you go on the Reddit and you find Imperator314's Reddit post, you'll find the one that works quickest for them, and the one I would recommend doing if you can do it is to build a power bank. So if we come in here and look at their technologies, they happen to have power banks already researched. This is a technology that allows you to build a building to store energy. It's effectively the physical storage, but for power. So if we come into construction, you can see they can build a power bank. By default, the first level of power bank stores 2,000 additional power, and it like most buildings, sort of exponentially improves as you level it up. It can store a lot of power. Additionally, in the tech tree, you have ultra capacitors that they also have. Ultra capacitors is much like automated logistics, mining robotization, industrial robotization, the whole slew there, where it provides, I believe, 100% capacity bonus to the effectiveness of power banks. So, much like automated logistics has 100% effectiveness to logistics, ultra capacitors does in the power bank. So it's a 100% more capacity storage for power banks. So in this case, if they build even one level of power bank here would provide them. This is actually a base 2,000 storage. With ultra capacitors, it's actually going to provide them about 4,000, if my memory is correct. That would allow them to hold 4,000 more. Their current storage is 1,303. So instead of having all their power come in, having more than is storable, so they lose the surplus, and then not having enough to ship to their zones, if you were to build that power bank, you would then have the ability to receive all that, store all that, and ship all that. And over time, they'd build up, because even then they still have surplus, and they'd slowly start to build power up. So that is the way that you go look on Reddit that they use to solve it. And that is, if that is the way you can do it, probably the most effective long-term solution. Now, why do I say if you're able to do that? Lots of us frequently try to do Tech 3 starts, which is the lowest technology you can start with. That only rewards you at the beginning of the game with the early tech. Power banks is decently far into the game. So if you start with the Tech 3 start, yeah, technically a Tech 3 start these days isn't technically Tech 3. Tech 3 would be 9 techs. You start with 10. Not a big difference. To get to power banks, you have to research 4 in basic tech, 4 in engineering, and then you can discover power banks, and that would be effectively your minimum earliest you can pick it up as your 9th tech. If you're playing on slow game speed, or you're playing on, I think it's slowest or epic speed, the lowest speed, that might be a really long time away, especially if that's not what you're focusing on. Some of your planets, you might realize you need to run to metal soil filtration. So instead of doing 4 in basic tech, 4 in engineering, and then you can find power banks, you might be trying to do that to get to advanced chemistry, right? So you get your 4 in basic tech, and then you're fishing for 4 in chemistry, you go over to metal soil filtration. So you're not always going to have power banks as a solution to that problem. It's frankly, in that situation, that's the best solution. If you can get that and solve effectively your shipping problem. Right, so in this case, he's got enough power, he's just having the problem with getting it from where it's produced to where it's needed. And the solution to that is power banks. However, you don't always have power banks, because it is decently deep in the tree, and it's usually not a priority to run for. So how can we solve this? And this is what I'm probably going to demonstrate in this video, is how can we solve this if we don't have power banks? The first thing is to figure out where your power is coming from and where your power is going. So we can figure out which zones have shortages, so we can minimize the amount of power that needs to be shipped. Over here we can see what you've got stored in the SHQ, what the inflow is, what the outflow is. But if you want to know what's going on the zone level, probably the best way I've found out to do this is to come to the zone and click items. In here, we can see what the zone produces, what the zone is receiving, what the zone wants to consume, what the zone is outputting, and what the zone is stockpiling. Zones have some limited capacity to stockpile, but if they have adequate logistical capacity, they will tend to ship things to the SHQ. That includes power. So in this case, right, that's why he's losing 744 power, is because he has enough logistical capacity to get it back to the SHQ. And it's exceeding his storage, etc. So right now, this is, if we go figure out how many cities, he's got 5 cities to look at. So right now we're looking at his capital, Nelson. Nelson produces 4.5 thousand power. It's currently receiving in 782. It is consuming 214, and it's outputting 1,822. So right now, this zone is both sending and receiving. And this, at first glance, is a little confusing. I'm actually surprised that this is what's going on in the SHQ, or in the zone. But this is probably because it's on the SHQ is on top of it. But yeah, it's outputting this amount of power. It's consuming this amount of power. It's producing this amount of power. Is there some assets in here that are cycled up or cycled down or something that isn't making sense? 1.1. Yeah, I'm surprised that this zone is both sending and receiving. Normally zones can consume... Ah, okay. So the zones also work like the SHQ. So the zone here has 1.6k. So it can only consume for what it has. It doesn't actually consume for what it's produced until it's produced. And zones also have a stockpile maximum. So this zone does have a stockpile maximum. This zone's specific stockpile maximum is 1,584. Here in the stockpile, it's rounding to 1.6. Okay. So for this zone to consume optimally could actually consume 2.6k, 2.7k. It needs to receive that difference from the SHQ. Or you need to find a way to improve its storage. So this is actually going to be a particularly hard problem to solve, because this is a zone that can't store enough of its own power to operate all its machinery. Right? It can only store 1.5, 1.6. It needs 2.4. So this zone needs to receive 8. Actually, ideally, needs to receive about 10k power, or not 10, 1,000 power turn. So the SHQ here itself almost needs most of, or the capital itself almost needs most of the SHQ's storage capacity to handle turn-to-turn storage. So they can produce the power, to save the power, to consume the power next turn. So that's going to be a hard problem to solve. And the solution, as we said, the long-term solution is to build a power bank. Short term here for the capital, there really isn't anything we can do because we're already taking advantage of the storage as much as we can. And in fact, building more power here is just going to make the problem worse. Weirdly. Normally, your solution to this, if you've got a shipping issue, is to build more power in your consuming locations. Here, we can't do that. Although, if we were able to ship 1,000 to this zone alone, that would work. So let's go view some other zones. Let's go to the next most populous zone. So this zone makes 221. Its stockpile isn't full, so it could store more. It's not exporting. It's importing. So it again still isn't getting enough of what it would want, right? It would really want 605. It's getting 516. But that's because it's importing. So in this case, in this zone, if we were to add and in fact we can store up to how much can this zone can store up to 770. So this zone could store enough power for its own needs. So we just have to make enough power here for its own needs. And right now it's requesting, it's technically requesting about 250 from SHQ. So we could make locally here more power. So we gotta get the power on. So we can do a thermalization plant, we can do a solar panel field, or we can do any of the power really. We don't necessarily want to make too much power. This is a temporary solution, right? This is the solution you'd be running while you're waiting for power banks, which is to make more power so you don't have to ship it around the place. A good example of probably what you do is either the power banks, or not the power. Let me see if I can keep my thoughts across. You can't do power banks. The thing you'd probably do that is usually available for a pretty early game is the solar panel field. So let's queue up a solar panel field here. Right, so that's going to take 2 turns to build. That's going to provide 50 power base. This is a planet where these perform a little underperforming actually due to probably the rain. So we're probably gonna expect to get like 40 off of that. We know we're short about 80 minimum shipping. We could do a lot more here. So let's look at these assets. Well, let's level the zone first. 4. Okay, so we can play a little bit more around in here without having to do too much of a difference. Energy-wise, solar panel field could be upgraded in 4.
Copy that.
We'll do that upgrade, and we'll upgrade the solar panel fields.
Copy that.
So when those finish, he'll have even more power, which in the long run would sort of exacerbate the shipping problem, right? But this is a zone that actually wants more power, so we're going to make it for the local needs. So in a couple turns, and once we're done going through all the cities, we'll cycle until this is done and see if that solves his brownout problem without having to put the power banks. Because I want to demonstrate how you can solve power banks, or solve the problem without power banks, because you don't always have power banks. Power banks is the perfect solution. Don't get me wrong, but you don't always have that. So how do you solve it before? Usually building power where you need it is the way you do it. So we can build power here to try to solve that power problem. We can go to this location. This location again is requesting power. It's requesting about 300 power. It doesn't make that locally. We can reduce the amount it needs to receive by making it locally. It can store up to 400 here, so we can make more locally. This zone only has an organic furnace for power. Traditionally, I wouldn't even rely on organic furnaces. As soon as you get solar panel, I'd probably try to transition away from them. Although, by the looks of it, they're down to Savannah, so they may be in the process of transitioning away from it. That's going to run out soon. Let's again. He's got no problems with rare earths. He's got no problems with machinery. Let's do another solar panel.
Okie dokie.
This is probably going to make about 400 power, about 40 power. If I do a solar panel, a couple solar panel fields, so we'll do like 3. In 2 turns, we should have enough power to here that we need to import, say, 120 less. That strains the sort of nationwide grid a little bit less. That will help to solve the problem. This location, again, it consumes more than it produces. Oh no, this is actually one place that's actually producing. So this is supplying net power. So this place is not needing any power to be delivered to it, so it's not a problem. We can ignore it. This place is consuming more power, although this is... How many workers do we have here? We'll try to build a solar panel here. Just a solar panel.
Affirmative.
Okay. So with that, I'm not going to play this game particularly hard. Is he at war with anyone that we need to be worried about? Probably hold out there if I'm just not actively fighting. He's at peace with those guys. Yeah, okay, so that's his 2 borders. So we got a peaceful border and we got a war border. I'm going to go ahead and just show that we can clear, without building power banks, can clear the brownout state here without building the power banks. So in theory, I believe in about 3 to 4 turns, I should be able to get this cleared. So we can just hit end turn, roll over the end turn a couple times. And this should clear. We're just building solar panels. Just building solar panels where the power consumption is, because his SHQ storage-wise is capped. His capital is power producing, but it doesn't even have enough capacity to store power for its own needs, so it needs to ship to the capital for the capital to ship back to it. And the capital plus its own storage is just enough to meet the needs of the capital, and thus it can't meet the needs of the empire at the same time as the capital. So we're going to show that you could solve this without building power banks. Power banks, again, is going to be the perfect solution, because then that's effectively, to put it a different way, He's having a brownout because he doesn't have the transmission lines to get the power to where it's being consumed. Technically, the game functionally is flavoring it as you don't have enough storage, which in this case really isn't what's going on. You don't have delivery capacity. You don't have the proverbial grid. But he does have enough power production, right? So what we're doing is a little bit counterintuitive. Because we don't have the capacity to store it, we need to make it where it can be stored and where it's needed. So he's actually producing so much in the capital that it has to be shipped to the SHQ, and then from the SHQ has to be shipped to where it's consumed. But he's effectively capped out in the zone, capped in the capital zone, capped out in the SHQ, so there's no growth there without power banks. So the long-term solution is power banks. If you didn't have power banks at this point, you'd be doing what I'm doing as a stopgap measure to give you enough time to get to power banks. He has it, so in practice, that's what you do. And then on Reddit, that's what he did do, and that did work for him.
Order received.
I'm just going to click through these.
Yes, Roger
Not
that,
really doing
sir.
any particularly interesting ones.
Aye, aye, sir.
Price every sold. Cool.
Affirmative.
I don't know if he's going to democracy. He probably would have done merit. We don't sell
Roger
people.
that.
So construction-wise, was there any delay? Oh, we weren't building the capital, so I'm not going to see it from there. Construction, was there any delays? There was delay on that one. That makes sense. That's the one that would have that problem. Okay. So that hasn't solved the power problem. In fact, because of how the zone storage is calculated, the actual storage here is fluctuating, right? So we sent everything he had in storage. That wasn't enough. He's received power. The storage is being exceeded, so everything in excess of storage is lost. And this turn, the storage, for whatever reason, is lower than it was last turn. So this is actually, in theory, made the problem a little bit worse. Again, we're just going to go ahead and cycle the turn again. And not next turn, but the turn after. It should have solved itself, although this is the temporary solution, remember. This is the solution of you're going to want your economy to continue to grow. You're going to want your power production to continue to grow. So it's not enough. If you're hitting the point where you're SHQ transiting limited, you're going to want to solve that problem, which is increase the storage capacity of the SHQ. Power is the thing that's most likely to happen to, because the power storage, both of zones and the SHQ, is so small. For a lot of the other things, it's fairly large. For solid things like metal, it's unlimited. So you don't have to be worrying about this for metal. You don't have to be worrying about this for rare earth metals. You don't have to worry about this for radioactives. It's power. Frequently power. Power is the main one. You could have this happen for water, but that's rare. Water is usually fairly large storage. You can have this happen from oil, especially if you've got a lot of petrol stuff going. You can have this happen on food as well. But physical storage is also an earlier tech. Physical storage is in the first tech group area. And as a side effect, also research is real fast. So if you find you're having a problem with anything but power, it's really easy to fix in the more permanent method. We're just demonstrating sort of your worst case scenario, which is if you need to solve it for power and you don't have power banks. Technically in the save we have power banks. Power banks would be the long-term solution. Okay, so now we're going to see if it's construction finished. A lot of the construction is finished. The solar panel field 3 didn't, but We may not need them finished. Morning Freeze, we'll just
Copy that.
apply you. Again,
Yes, sir.
I'm not going to worry too much about these decisions. We're just going to be taking decisions
Roger
to
that.
keep the nation reasonably stable.
Copy that.
I'm not necessarily planning on returning the save file to him. So once again, we didn't have enough shipping capacity. Storage actually went up. No, storage capacity went down again for whatever reason. Smaller decrease this time. But everything that was in storage shipped. He received more from his zones than his storage was capable of storing, so the difference was lost. So we're still in that brownout state, but the construction is now done. So next turn, we should see that that construction makes it so some of these zones need less power. Now, that might not be enough with just the Tier 1 solar panels coming online. We only just finished, I'm going to guess, about 160 power supply. Right, so that's not necessarily going to be enough to reduce the demand. We might technically need those solar 3s to come online as well to get it fixed. How quickly can I get the solar panel 1s upgraded to 2? 3 turns.
Copy that.
We'll follow those up just in case I didn't do enough for just the 1s. Again, this is
Okie dokie.
a short-term fix to a long-term problem that is not on this site.
Okie
The real solution, long-term solution, is the pedal to power
Okie
banks.
dokie.
But this is what you would do if you don't have power banks researched already. Right, is you figure out a way to sort of shuffle the production around so you don't have to deliver it to zones. And then we can also see, before we end this turn, we can see how bad the brownout is. So right now he's getting about 89% of the production delivered. So 89% of the power is being delivered to his assets that need power, that the local zone can't supply. And we should see some progress on this turn as those solar panels come online and provide us additional power in zones that need power, taking the weight off of the SHQ. And then once we're done with this, I'll also show you what the power bank does. The power bank, I believe, will raise the storage capacity to the local zone, in addition to raising the storage capacity for the SHQ if it's connected logistically to the SHQ. So it is a thing where if you need more storage, you ideally want to probably build it in your capital because you won't ever lose logistical access to the capital if everything goes according to plan. But you can build elsewhere to improve the SHQ storage as well. So it is something that if you're really trying to have a massive stockpile for like petrol or power, you just build. Just keep building. Okay, back around to us. And for whatever reason, storage decreased even more. 1,166 was shipped to zone. 1,000 was lost due to max storage being exceeded. The capital here is still showing 89% production penalty. These other zones, which are now receiving the effects from those power, should have more power being generated locally. So the power that was just produced has now arrived at this zone. So we can see the power that was previously in the stockpile was 356, plus the 146 sent by the SHQ wasn't quite enough power. If we cycle one more turn, what we should see is this zone is going to need less power because it's going to have 418 in storage. That's still more than the SHQ wants to send, right? We're not getting quite enough here. How much was the solar panel providing? Level 1 solar panel. Oh, we actually got 53%, 53 off of it, so... No, 63 off of it. I guess the rain moved. That's probably what happened. The rain has an effect on solar output. Although the rain... Is there an easy way to see the radiance effect of rain? I know rain has an effect on solar panels. Cloud modifier, yeah. So this score has a lower cloud modifier than the other one I was looking at before. So if we cycle another turn, we should see that this zone, for example, will need less power from the SHQ. This is the zone we actually built the most power in. So previously... Did it finish on? Yeah, should be having more power. We're going to cycle one more turn. We're going to see how much of a difference that makes. Although, at this point, I'm going to start the process of building the power bank. The power bank doesn't take that much to build, right? The power bank of all the storage buildings, so power bank, ammo depot, fuel depot, food storage, water reservoir, is the most expensive one. In fact, it takes 2 turns to build, and it takes rare earth metals, takes machinery parts. You don't generally, early game, you don't want to be building power banks if you can get away without. And again, this is going to add, before tech modifiers, this should add like 200 power storage, or 2,000 power storage. So we're going to build this in the capital.
Yes,
it's going to take 2 turns to build. We should see a power effect from the already completed solar panels next turn. It might not be quite enough. Partially, also, for whatever reason, the max storage of his SHQ is going down. I don't control that very well. That's apparently what's going on. Which is not helping with the brownout situation.
Aye, aye, sir.
Affirmative.
We have
Copy
plenty of
that.
IP, solely IP.
Roger that.
Yes, sir.
Okay, so in 2 turns the power bank is done, 3 turns it will be working. I forget if the storage applies the first turn it works or the second turn it works. So we're going to play until the power bank kicks in. We're also going to be watching power to see if we need to be shipping that much, right? So right now we have a storage capacity. We'll say the storage capacity is 1,000. Storage capacity fluctuates a little bit with the storage capacity of the zone the capital is on as well. So his upcoming turn, we should see the first batch of solar panels should be officially affecting the power grid at this point. The second batch should just be coming online, and then they should be actually applying. I think the turn before the power bank will apply. We'll see if we actually get to power surplus before the power banks come online at this point. And I'm sitting here staring at his northern border. I'm like, I'm hoping we don't get attacked because I don't want to fight right now. Because I'm trying to do this sort of economic tutorial. I think he's got enough guys there. They're not gonna poke the border. Okay, waiting for it to roll back around to us. Okay. So, power storage went up this turn. Whatever reason. Everything that was in the stockpile last turn, I think, shipped. So 988 went out. Or 986 went out, sorry. Which was the stockpile end of last turn. So everything from last turn went out. Still getting 87% around the capital, so the capital's still having issues, because capital actually just has filled both its own internal stockpile and is now, as a side effect, reliant on receiving stuff from the SHQ. Alright, so again, this zone can only hold 1,611 power. It's producing 4.3, so if it had storage, it wouldn't need to receive as much power. It's currently, as side effects, requesting more power than the SHQ could even store last turn, and thus wasn't able to meet its own requirements. This zone, I believe, requested less, although because that just means that more gets delivered to the SHQ, to the HQ, or would have to be delivered here from the SHQ. So more of it is effectively going to the capital. Same sort of thing here. It had less than it had to request, although it still didn't get its entire request. So the problem should have improved, but it didn't improve enough to be fixed, which is a fair problem. That happens sometimes when you're trying to do these sort of micro corrections. That's why the power bank is such a perfect solution for this specific problem, because the power bank will fix it. The solution that I'm trying to do, which is the stopgap that you do if you don't have the power bank, is far less likely to fix it permanently. And even if it did fix it, it would probably be temporary. Yeah, so in theory, the power bank will be built next turn if there's no delays, and should be applying the turn after.
Order received.
And again, from a power perspective, they have enough power production. They don't have enough storage.
Aye, aye, sir.
So they can't ship enough. So the power bank is the perfect solution to that. Whereas the other solution I'm trying to do is a solution that may work. It's not the solution that is guaranteed to work. As you can see by the fact that it hasn't magically fixed everything in 3 turns. So we're going to go for a 4th turn. This should be all the solar panel 3s coming online that we upgraded. The solar panel 2s that we upgraded from the ones that we built will be completing this turn. They will probably apply hand in hand with the power bank, so we really won't get to see the effects those have independent of the power bank. and waiting for the turn to end, the end turn to roll over. Staring nervously at the northern border. To be fair, the forces on the other side of the border aren't that scary. But I don't know if that's due to poor recon or his units just being really good. Okay, back around to us. Power storage went down for whatever reason. What was in the zone was shipped. So the power bank is now done. It's not going to kick in this turn because obviously it hadn't worked. It just finished construction. I forget if it's the very first turn that the power bank is worked at the storage is applied or the second turn. Basically, what I'm forgetting is if the storage effect is applied immediately or if it's applied to the following turn. Because if it's applied to the following turn, we got to wait another turn for it to actually apply. But construction-wise, everything at this point is done. I know the storage bank the power bank is going to be the solution that's going to fix it all. So I'm not going to build anything else. We're just going to see that kick in. But those problems should be reducing the need requirement to ship things to the zone. Oh, interesting. Okay, so we're now producing so much power here. This zone, in theory, isn't... Or, well, only just now is storing enough to meet its own needs. So, in theory, next turn, this zone should not require any power from the SHQ. Right, it had enough power to ship power. So this zone actually shipped power last turn because of how the math is applied. Right, so you receive, or you do production, which first you receive from the SHQ, you do production, you ship what you can't store at the zone level. So this zone, weirdly, is in a situation on the last turn, specifically the last turn, where it both received and shipped. So in theory, going forward, it shouldn't need to receive anymore. Not the case here, although significant reduction in how much it needed to receive, right? So at this point, it now has 211 in storage. Surprised the actual solar panels we added here didn't help more, although they've only just finished upgrading again. And this one only just finished, okay. So yeah, weren't able to, in enough time, make a big enough difference with the power. Although we would notice on this one, on future turns, this one would not need this 225 power. Now, whether or not that would be enough to fix the grid, probably not. And that's why you generally, if you can do the power bank solution, and this is the problem you're having, you do the power bank solution. You're receiving your own power. You, in theory, in a couple turns, you'll have enough power. In a couple turns, you should have enough power because the solar panels will just come online, but okay. Yeah, so I think we're going to reach the point where we're going to have enough power to not need to ship power just as we have the storage to ship it. So I probably, if I did a little bit of a preemptive test out on how to solve this problem, could have solved it a little bit better without using the power banks. But power banks is the perfect solution. next turn we should see the effects of that.
Roger that.
Let them buy the IP. So you can see the power bank's built, but it doesn't actually apply immediately. It has to spend a turn working to provide its effect. I don't know if its effect applies to the next turn, if that makes sense. So it may actually take a couple turns to make this effect show. So this turn, the power bank should be working. Now, that might not mean... Well, that should mean at the end of this turn, we have plus 2,000 storage. I think he has ultra capacitor, so it'll actually be plus 4,000 storage. Now, that won't mean the shipping outbound will be solved, because the shipping outbound might be applied based on what was received before the storage effect kicked in. So we'll see. It might take one more turn to actually kick in proper. Waiting for the ad to take the turn. Here we are again. So it did actually just kick in. So storage has now been increased to 4,421. And apparently that's almost all coming from the power bank. The power bank is providing us, in theory, should be providing 4,840. Technically that's providing it at the zone level. So some of that's getting divided between the SHQ and the zone. So the SHQ isn't quite getting 4,000. But the zone, I think, got 4,000. Right, so now we can see, we still have, for this turn, that brownout state. 86% power being delivered because the SHQ on the previous turn did not have enough to ship. But next turn, it's going to have 2,249, which is probably enough, because we've increased the storage. And in this case, one of the main places he was shipping it to was his own capital, because his capital didn't have storage. But we just built for the capital 4,000 more storage. So that's actually going to solve that alone has probably solved the problem, right? He didn't even need the SHQ to be shipping it anymore. That alone probably solved the problem. Our changes with solar panels here in Ohmsville, right? We haven't fixed the brownout nationwide. But what I just showed you over the last couple turns where we were building solar panels, we fixed it in Ohmsville. So the brownout's solved here. And that's because we now have Ohmsville at the point where it doesn't need to receive power. Right, so if we can make enough power here locally, it doesn't need to receive any, so it just ships it back to the SHQ. I think that was the only place we built enough power to do that. Oh, well, technically we did enough here as well if we had enough workers. There's not enough workers here. This zone's having problems because there's just not enough workers. If this zone had enough workers, it would be making enough power from that one solar panel. It wouldn't need any imports. And actually, here, we've just solved it. So when we cycle into the next turn, we can come back here and check, and this zone shouldn't need to receive any power. Yeah, it stored enough power for itself, it shouldn't be receiving anything. So this zone solved, this zone solved. Even if we didn't have the power banks, these two zones would be fixed. This zone, already fixed. You already had that one working. This one's having worker problems, otherwise it would be fixed. Although we've just solved the problem with in the longer term, we've solved the problem with the power bank. And the big reason, actually, is because the power bank has improved the storage capacity to the SHQ and this zone. So for the SHQ, we're now going to have the capacity to store 4,000 instead of like 1,000, which means the SHQ is going to be able to ship 4,000. We've also improved the storage capacity for its capital zone. So now the capital zone can store all 2,600 it needs from its own production and isn't relying on having to ship to the SHQ to receive it from the SHQ. So literally next turn we should see that like he's going to be barely shipping any power. He's going to be shipping like 13 power here. And there's going to be none going here because there's none going here already. There's going to be none going here. There's going to be none going here. And there's going to be, in theory, none going here. So he's going to go from he's shipping everything the SHQ has to the SHQ's barely shipping it. Because we've done changes to the power grid in these expands. And we did a power storage improvement to the capital. Because the capital wasn't having a production problem, it was having a storage problem. And this is why in the long run the power storage, the power banks, is the solution. But the short run you could have solved it by making more power in locations where it was needed, with the exception of the capital. Although the capital's demand was low enough that if you didn't need power shipped from the SHQ to anywhere else, the capital was fine. If that makes sense. So we'll cycle it one more turn, and we'll show that it's fixed. Because at this point it's fixed. I'm just waiting for this turn to cycle so I can show you this. And yeah, this was definitely a problem where the power bank was the best solution. It was a problem that could have just barely been solved without the power bank, looking back on it. And that was very much the difficulty with the fact that the capital needs more power than it can store, and is producing more power than it can store. So you're in that weird situation that the capital had to supply power to the SHQ so the SHQ could give the power back to the capital, which is unusual. Usually when you're in that sort of shipping problem, it's you don't have enough storage for shipping to non-capital zones. And here we are. So power is trending up. And as I said earlier, previously we were shipping everything in the SHQ. And now it shipped 20. Right, because the biggest consumer of power on this turn that needs power from the SHQ is this zone. This zone received 20. That's all the power that shipped from the SHQ. This zone is making enough power to make its own needs. This zone's making enough power to make its own needs. This zone's making enough power to make its own needs. The capital now has enough storage to store the power it needs for itself. And arguably, if we didn't build the storage, this turn he may still have a brownout in the capital, because that's how power demanding the capital is relative to its own storage capacity. We were storing like 1.6, 1.7k in the capital. The storage without the storage upgrade was in the SHQ was about 1,000. So in this state, if we did this state but without the power bank, so if we magically poofed the power bank right now, he would be right in that line, real tight on the power balance. I think you'd basically be at like 99%, right? So this place plus this place, his smallest town and his biggest town are the only ones that are actually needing power from the capital. But his capital actually from the SHQ. But his capital actually needs to sort of arbitrage the power through the SHQ to such a degree that he kind of needs more storage at this point, which is good. He has the tech to do that. The storage, as you can see here, has fixed the problem. Really fixed the problem. He needs like 1,000, 1.1 thousand storage. We build the storage building, he has 4K storage, which is 3 to 4 times more than he needs. So he's golden. Like that's the solution. That's the long-term solution. What I was trying to show you with the solar panels, and to some degree I did show you the solar panels here, is the short-term solution. Right? If you're having a problem where the SHQ can't send power to a zone, if you can make that zone make enough power for itself and have enough storage to store its own power, it doesn't need to receive any power. So this zone, for example, is receiving enough from the SHQ. In fact, in this case, it's actually supplying power to the SHQ. You probably would have wanted to run it a little bit closer to the vest in the situation where you can't ship. But in the short term, right, overrunning it like this, if we didn't have the power bank, would mean at least this zone would be making full power, or full production. This zone would be making full production. He was already getting full production out of this zone because he already had enough power there. We built the solar panel here. If he can get enough workers in here, it doesn't need any shipping. And then the big elephant in the room is, yeah, he's got plenty of power at the capital. Doesn't have enough storage. He's got so much power there, he's actually reached the point where the capital can't store it all. And it needs... long term is going to need that power bank. It doesn't need it very high level. The first level here is 3 to 4 times more than he needs. But he needed that one level. And there we go. So it's in there. All his problems are solved. 20 power needs to get shipped to one of the expands. And as I said, it's a base 2,000 max energy. That gets a plus 100, as you can see, from ultra capacitors, which he has. The governor also has a very small effect based on relations and skill. So he's getting 4,480. Not all of that gets shipped to the SHQ, because the SHQ gets a diminished effect off of the storage of all zones that it has logistical contact with. But that is applying specifically to the zone's storage, which in this case is perfect. That's his one bottleneck, which is prior to this he only had about 1.6, 1.7k storage in the own zone. The zone's making 4k, so the zone has to sort of arbitrage the remaining 2.3k power via the SHQ, and without storage, the SHQ can't do that. We've added the storage, so the zone's fixed. The zone doesn't need to do that arbitrage anymore. But that's also allowed the SHQ to have the capacity to do that arbitrage. So that's how that problem is. That's how you diagnose it. Also, is when you're having a shipping problem, the easiest way to find you have a shipping problem is to come to your SHQ, put your cursor over it to figure out what the inflow and the outflow is. If end of last round stocks is equal to sent to zones, you're shipping as much as can be shipped because that's all you had to ship. In this case, this has been fixed, so we're not shipping all that can be shipped. So there's excess capacity for things to be shipped. You might end up with other logistical problems, not physically be able to ship it for other reasons. That's usually unusual with energy. Energy has free logistical cost across land, but it can come up if you're doing intercontinental shipping over sea or over air. Same sort of thing with water. Water is free to ship on land. It's not free to ship on water and air. Same thing with oil. The other one you tend to get it to happen with is oil, where if you're running a large enough economy, you might have a situation where you don't have the oil storage or the demand that you have. So it can all go out the door at once. And if you have enough production capacity, it might go all out the door and be immediately replaced, and you'll have it being like, yeah, stockpile is stable. Even when not enough is going to the front line because you physically don't have enough capacity to store it. Although that's not the problem he's having here right now. Although that might be a problem he has in the future. In which case, again, the solution is you go into usually the SHQ, the capital. If the capital actually ends up full and you need more capacity, you can put it elsewhere. But the capital is usually the most reliable and the most effective. And you build the storage building associated with the building. The 5 storage buildings is the power bank, which works for power, the ammo, which works for ammo, or ammo depot, which works for ammo, fuel depot, which works for fuel, food, which works for the food silo, which works for food, water reservoir, which works for water. Everything else is an unlimited cap. You can see food has a cap, water has a cap, oil has a cap, bullets have a cap. Metal doesn't. Metal is uncapped. Industry is representing people's ability to build things, so there's no real way to store that. So that's capped, but there's nothing you can do to change that cap. It also tends to be a really big cap. Power has a cap, and you can fix that. You can modify that. Radioactive is uncapped. Soldiers are uncapped. Colonists are uncapped. Although, remember, soldiers and colonists cost food to maintain. So if you're keeping them, you're feeding them. So in this situation, had I been actively playing, I'd be trying to use these soldiers, because that's probably why he's running a food deficit here, is because I haven't been using his soldiers. So his soldiers, this many soldiers eats 448 food. So he's actually feeding 448 food. Yeah, as you can see, 448 food is going to feed those recruits. So if he doesn't need them, you probably disband them so they have to feed themselves. They're not running on your food tool. Rare metals has no cap. Machines have no cap. High-tech parts have no cap. So the only thing that's capped that you can't modify the cap on is the industrial points. Everything else, if you're at cap and you're worried you might be consuming more than cap, you can build a stockpile building. Your zones usually also... Well, your zones also follow the same rules as the SHQ. But the zones will usually ship everything that is surplus to the SHQ if there's logistics to do so, if they are not projected to need it for the next turn. So you can mitigate how much arbitrage you need to do with the SHQ if you can make things local to where they're needed. Right, so here we've got 1.6k oil being needed, so it's receiving 1.2 from the SHQ. If we made more oil here, it would store more locally, meaning we'd have to store less in the SHQ, which means more would have to, or less would have to be shipped to the SHQ because more would be made locally. But the local storage does have storage capacity. So in this case, the location can only store 9.7K. If you're for some reason you're consuming more than 9.7K here, it has to get arbitraged through the SHQ. And I think that's what he's running into here. And what sort of made the threading of the needle, if you weren't using power banks here, very narrow, was that his capital is demanding so much power that it can no longer realistically be stored locally and had to be arbitraged to the SHQ. Okay, I think at this point I've sort of covered everything I'm going to go over in this video. Wasn't quite able to show the effect that I wanted, which is that you can frequently forego building a power bank if you don't have power banks and still solve that problem. In this case, he was threading the line that would have had to been thread to make that work. Arguably wasn't worth the squeeze anymore, especially because he had power banks researched. In theory, I should have done some power banks from turn 1, and it would have solved itself in 3 turns instead of taking the 5 turns that I did. But yeah. I hope you've enjoyed this if you watched it all the way through. I stream live most of my recordings to Twitch under the username willcall100, and then upload the local recordings, stream live to Twitch under the username willcall. Let me see if I can remember my own username. And then record those streams locally for upload to YouTube under the username willcall100. That's where the confusion is coming in. So it's willcall, no 100 at the end, on Twitch, and then it's willcall with 100 at the end on YouTube. And then I do post to Reddit under the username willcall001. Because apparently I can't keep my username the same everywhere. I do technically control the username that's willcall100 on Reddit, but I don't use that one. But yeah. So I hope you've all enjoyed. If you're watching on YouTube, there is other Shadow Empire content up on the channel. I think the current run is starting to go pretty well. When that one comes to a close, I'm going to start a run of Songs of 6 while I begin preparation for making the unit overview video for Shadow Empire. I do have a sub-unit overview, which is basically an overview of all the different sub-units that go into units. What I will be doing as soon as I'm done with the current run is making an overview of all the units. So if you're interested in seeing that, feel free to check in the future on the channel or subscribe to the channel on YouTube. Edited content like that probably does not get streamed. So until the next stream and or video, I wish you all the best of luck and a good time. And with that, bye for now.